So now that's going. I need to. Is something shared? Am I going to share the screen here? Yeah.
Here's the picture of this.
That's what
Oh, okay.
Take this kiss upon the brow, and in parting from you now, thus much let me avow. You are not wrong who deem that my days have been a dream. Yet if hope has flown away, in a night or in a day, in a vision or in none, is it therefore the less gone? All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep, while I weep. O God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream?
I wanted to say who it was real quick. You can go and start.
In the Ides great again. We missed last month again. Sorry about that. One day maybe we'll be able to get back to the Ides happening on the Ides, but schedules don't allow it. We are revisiting a scope that we did a year ago in November.
Mhm.
It was on Edgar Allan Poe being one of the very first victims of cancel culture.
And real quick, that poem was by Poe, and it was read by a YouTube channel called Red Frost Motivation. It's got a lot of neat stuff on there, so I wanted to get that out there real quick.
Definitely. But how Edgar Allan Poe was one of the first victims of cancel culture. So we're going to recap a little bit of that because we've discovered more as we delved into that subject, but we're also going to go into other people like
We found similarities between a man named Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare, and how we found that there were blue checks, like the way this title says. There were blue checks way before the internet.
right.
Authorized.
All right, and when they write glowingly about people in history, that should be a red flag to you. And if they write negatively, like they've done so with Edgar Allan Poe, that should also be
Just
a red
like today,
flag.
when media uses the same words to attack somebody, and they're all using the same word, that the points have gone out, and it turns out there there have been talking points throughout the ages and going back into the late 1500s, early 1600s with Shakespeare and this guy. So, and one of those, the talking points seem to be today. It's one of the biggest ones is if you want to disparage somebody and instead of arguing against their message, you call them racists.
Right.
Well, back in the day, if you're an atheist, man, and you shouldn't be listening to that guy. And a lot of times, it's usually these people project the opposite.
It's the complete opposite. Like, I don't think that we realize how much of a complete opposite it was on Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, so Edgar Allan Poe's what he considered his masterpiece was Eureka. And if you Google that, you get all the same talking points of how it was absurdity, that a lot of people question it's whether he was being authentic. Maybe he was just trying to be.
At all. And we've talked to people, and Yvonne's seen in the past too, that people, you can buy anthologies of Poe's work, and Eureka is not even included.
Because we've been fascinated with Poe since we were kids, and we'd never heard of Eureka. I've purchased the whole set of Edgar Allan Poe where Eureka's nowhere in it. And think of this. We're not going to go back into what it's not an easy read.
No.
It can be a little bit, scientific.
He has complex sentences, much less paragraphs.
Right. So it's not easy. So I'm not going to delve into that, but think of this. I'm going to read the last sentence of Eureka, and as you're thinking of that, contemplate on the fact that he was labeled an atheist. In the meantime, bear in mind that all is life within life, the less within the greater, and all within the spirit divine. So Lou and I have gone back and read more on it as we've listened to a couple of other people that touched on Eureka who did really good analysis of it. But just a short basic synopsis of Eureka. It's all about Poe, what he thinks about the universe and our creator. And he touches probably his biggest problems, or the reason that they went after him and had to smear him, was because he took on the scientism, the scientist of the time. And
he took on religion at the time. It was like you go back and there's a layer upon layer of disingenuous interpretations. There's the way that they try to guide the narrative for so long.
Right.
And I would, based at the root, it's evil. They want to separate us from who we are. And he basically argues in there that we are part of the divine. We are created.
Right.
And therefore you don't have to rely on so-called experts to look at this world and creation and see what is. And you can discern that. You can pray for discernment and stuff too. Oh boy. Ambulance.
I don't know. But Eureka is basically about the idea that the universe was one, and then in its natural state, and then it
and there is a big bang of sorts, but it's not the way
he
it's
doesn't
described.
really
He doesn't say big bang, but it seems that he's describing it. This one it exploded into
many, and that he believes, and he doesn't believe that the theory of gravity, which it is a theory, right, not a law.
Well, it's not even a theory because you can't even test it.
And he challenged the idea of gravity. I mean, his idea of gravity is that matter attracts other matter, and that there's like this magnetism for all of us trying to get back to our creator.
Right.
And that guy's an atheist. He challenged infinity. And what he challenged with these scientists, what he was saying is, with these scientists came the knowledge that there were these concepts that they were just accepted norms. It's kind of like the climate change.
You can't prove it. You can't do.
What's
an
that they say with
experiment.
all the scientists when they all have
Consensus.
the consensus
And
is
consensus is not scientific.
right. And
It's
so
it's not a vote.
this knowledge gets passed on down, Aristotle.
Aristotle. Dig at maybe that,
He may not even have
some
been
folks
real.
postulate that he's like a caricature, or not a caricature, but it's a conglomeration of something that was real in the past.
Right.
And they've corrupted it.
And that Sir Francis Bacon, he called them
Same thing.
talking about these scientists and how they accepted these laws or these theories, but they never bothered to follow through on the facts or
Right. Well, they state concepts and then they get treated as facts, and
you just
they
accept
keep
it
getting
because that
repeated.
was they keep getting repeated. And the part about Kepler, and I don't know if you know about
Kepler and
Kepler's laws. He had three
laws of planetary movement, or
right,
whatever.
which were basically guesses.
And when there's a quote from what Kepler actually wrote, and he says in there that he guessed
Right.
at these concepts of gravity and what it does, and elliptical orbits instead of circular, because he was supposed to be improving on Copernicus and his concept of the rotation of the planets and stuff like
Right.
that. So,
And so if you think about a lot of what we have accepted as facts that have to do with outer space or the planets, there are things that can never be proven. So, there's a lot of knowledge that are, or, I don't even know if I want to call it knowledge.
And part of what Poe says in Eureka is that knowing you're not limited in realizing that you can't know everything. He was putting out that these guys, scientists, religionists, they can't prove anything. They just say it and then call you heretics for going against the grain.
And there's nothing new under the sun. We always say
over
that.
and
And so it's
over
like the
again.
same thing that's going on now. And if you contest the idea of man-made climate change, or, you're labeled, an idiot or a conspiracy theorist.
Atheist is not as powerful a derogatory as it used to be, and that's kind of too bad.
Right.
But
Eureka was dedicated to a man named Alexander von Humboldt, who wrote Cosmos. And when I started looking into him, I started seeing he was kind of having the same problem that Poe was having with Eureka. If you Google Eureka, you'll see how they talk about it. They downplay it, they mock it.
And at the very end, they give some other positive viewpoints, but short shrift and
right
just at the end.
And so Cosmos is where Eureka was a response to what he read in Cosmos. And Cosmos was such a huge piece that there were several of the sciences that were created out of
I actually had that
geography, seismology. So you'll see them writing about the cosmos, downplaying it.
But then in another paragraph, they talk about he was the founder of meteorology was another one.
And what was it, cryptology or
no, seismology was the third one.
Seismology. But they also did the same thing to him, where they tried to paint him as like
paint him as an atheist.
And there's the race card. He was not. He was asked about it, and he, like Edgar Poe, was like, "Heavens no." So you see a lot of the same things. But I bought the scope that we did about it. We had talked about it. His doctor, Poe's doctor, who treated him in the hospital before he died, and he wrote a book in defense of Edgar Allan Poe, to refute, the idea of Poe. Like everything, we have this idea that
he was a drunkard and a gambler and just
is this melancholy soul that was obsessed with death. And one thing I noticed when I was looking at all the obituaries is that just like with now, current news, like local news, they'll all have they've done those compilations where they'll show them all saying the same talking points, the same words. Well, the words for
the same
Poe
thing then
were melancholy,
macabre,
and
he was an atheist. Those were the three common over
Right.
and over again.
And so in this book, in defense of Edgar Allan Poe, he goes through everything. This doctor had talked to, so when Poe had traveled to Baltimore that week that they found him on the curb, he talked to like the train conductor that Poe rode on that train. He talked to his friends, people of reputable, titles within the community, and none of them describe him the way that we know him. Just an interesting tidbit. When he talked to the conductor of the train, he said that there were two mysterious gentlemen who were behind Poe on the train, and they got off with Poe when Poe went into Baltimore that night. It was around 9:00, and he said they were suspicious looking, and he said he was convinced that whatever happened to Poe, that those two gentlemen were involved in. There's so many myths about his death.
His condition was before he died, and then even about his death itself, they can't get the location right. It's not consistent. The way he died is not consistent. I mean, we've heard of rabies, we've heard of
Cooping. It was an election, that day
fraud
on
deal.
the 3rd, where cooping is where they would someone would come and kidnap you, and they would ply you with alcohol or drugs and get you to go vote the way they want to, and then they would have you change clothes, and they would go at a different polling place. But when that didn't happen, because in the defense of Edgar Allan Poe, the doctor says that that election happened on October 3rd. He didn't even get into Baltimore until the 4th. So that's not true.
But he's on his way there because he's got a new job, an editing. There's a long lost love or previous love from before. He lost his wife a few years before to tuberculosis.
Right.
But there was a previous love, and he was engaged to her. And so he had many reasons to live. He wasn't melancholy. He wasn't suicidal for sure. And
No.
he had good prospects. He was only 40 years old, and apparently he was healthy until then.
And the reason we're going back over this and talking about it, was why did they go out of their way to just totally paint the opposite of what he was? And Lou and I believe that it was because of this book, Eureka.
Eureka was written about a year and a half before he died, and I think it rocked the world of the narrative that was being played. And
right.
I think, and I wrote something down, that he was as much a threat to religionists
right.
as he was to scientismos. He was as big a threat to all of. He was going to upend. It was going to, he was going to expound on Eureka. He was going to do more.
He planned a lecture series all across the South and the Midwest.
Produce a magazine about it. He was going to expound on his ideas that he put forth in Eureka. And basically, it's like a lot of people do not realize how powerful they are as divine beings.
Right.
We are divine beings. We were created.
Right. And so what he did is he looked at life. He was able to merge the physical with the material, with the spiritual, in a way that nobody had ever done before. And we know that in history, they rewrite history. They lie about people. They build up people that shouldn't be built up. They tear down people they shouldn't tear down. And
the old saying, and some attribute to Napoleon, history is a lie agreed upon.
Right. And so you have to ask yourself, why do they do this? And so if there are characters in history that were fake, which Poe kind of alludes to the fact he thinks Aristotle might have been one of those. Mm-hmm. Well, Poe, I definitely believe, was a real man. He wrote all this stuff. I think he was a brilliant mind. So why did they feel the need to smear him? Well, they couldn't corrupt him because the system, we all know the system corrupts people. And if they can't co-opt you, or if they can't steer you,
then they have to destroy you.
And
they leave him up a little bit in a way, but they leave him up as this dour, gloomy person.
Yes.
He wasn't, when you look at a lot of his quotes out of Eureka, he is it's in there. He's looking at creation in awe and reverence.
Right.
He is amazed about what he sees.
And Griswold, who wrote, who started the whole process of smearing him by writing his obituary a couple of days later, which Griswold was they were bitter enemies. Poe
Started out as partners, but then Poe spoke truth and he didn't take kindly to that.
Right. Poe didn't like him and Griswold didn't like him, but he somehow got to write the obituary, which was a horrible obituary. But if you in defense of Edgar Allan Poe, written by the Dr. Moran, he talks to whoever Poe was living with that whole year before he died, while he wrote Eureka. And so Griswold describes him as a drunk and just
Gambler.
Gambler, someone that's not with it. You couldn't have written Eureka and not been with it. And to think, and truthfully, over the time, his lifetime, when he wrote, The Raven and all these different works, you couldn't have been a drunkard and done that.
And you guys can go back and see last November, our Ides on Eureka, the deplatforming of Edgar Allan Poe, and we get into some good detail about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, there's really some good stuff in there.
And looking at this, I went back to the book when I first found out about Eureka, and we found out about this man. We remembered about this man named Christopher Marlowe, who lived in the late 1500s in England, and he was a contemporary of Shakespeare. And so that's why we put in the title, because then we forgot to mention in our title, we talk about blue checks before the internet, and we said Shakespeare and Mark Twain with question marks, and history pulls forward Mark Twain and glorifies him a lot.
Right.
They kind of disparage Poe, and then you look back in the late 1500s in Elizabethan era in England, and we have Christopher Marlowe, who was a great playwright who I had never really heard of, and apparently his plays are still performed today, but he was another person who was slandered as being an atheist at the time. And it seems, from what I've been reading, is that a lot of his plays, he was digging at the Elizabethan era and their tenets, basically, in British Empire and how good it was. And he was like, no, you're evil. And one of his plays is Tamerlane, which is kind of loosely based on an emperor, Turkic Mongol emperor in the Middle East, while I can't remember the centuries, but a very cruel, sadistic leader, and he's basically kind of, being kind of a rebel and kind of pointing out and kind of satire and stuff in his plays that that's a kind of like an evil empire, the Elizabethans, and they were trying to tout that we're Christian, we're this, and we're a strong empire, and we're good, and we're bringing civilization to the rest of the world. And he was countering that. He died early as well. He died in an inn, and there were supposedly there was a knife fight.
Right.
I don't usually picture a playwright being somebody that's going to be getting in knife fights, but I think he was around 29 or 30.
He was 29. And
he gets killed. And also, he's a well-known man at this time. I think he's actually popular with his plays before Shakespeare is. And
he is.
He's well-known, but his autopsy disappears. There's no death certificate that disappears. So
Edgar Allan Poe's autopsy disappeared.
Yeah, his disappeared as well. We just found some similarities between these two guys. And then there's arguments about, is Shakespeare a real person or was somebody else Shakespeare?
Right.
There's even conspiracy stuff. Marlowe fake escape an arrest warrant, and then he fled to France.
Yeah.
Wrote a Shakespeare later on, which
there's many different theories on that. There's some people that think Francis Bacon was. Knowing what I know now, I question whether Shakespeare was he one of those Aristotle types that was made up. That reminded me on I don't know why that reminded me on Poe. and his enemy Griswold. Griswold wrote a book called The Poets of Poetry or something. It was supposed to be just like the gold standard for people to go to of any poet that's worthy of being known about is in this book. And Poe has got like three works that are in there, but there were these other poets that were given like 45 or and
lesser talent.
It was all over the place. We didn't really plan it, so apologize for that.
Well, and we were also doing, because we've got Poe overload right now.
Yeah,
in the last few days.
Definitely.
There is so much.
Something funny is that Poe was of literature than he was works.
Ray Bradbury, Alfred Hitchcock, Mark Twain, even, which is real or not.
I question whether Mark Twain was
the Sherlock Holmes character is based on I think it's Murder in the Rue Morgue. Dupin, Detective Dupin. H.P. Lovecraft, H.G. Wells, all credit Twain credit Poe for their strong influence on them. Rudyard Kipling even said, "The debt I owe to Poe is a heavy one."
Right.
So, and he brought the modern short story. He basically brought about the modern short story in America.
Right.
And
he brought different kinds of
a part
genres.
of his, what he was trying to do as a literary critic was to build up and find American talent writers in the 1800s, early 1800s, so that in our American schools would actually be studying American writers instead of English writers as much. They were trying to build that genre.
So he didn't find some of the poets that were included. He didn't think that they should be included. Anyway, he gave constructive criticism, and people took offense to that. So Poe would go. He would give lectures. He could draw a couple thousand people to a lecture. Griswold.
Yeah.
Wherever he went.
He wrote a character into a story that gets dumber after reading Griswold's work.
Right.
Sure, that set
so you can see why
more.
There was this bitterness, this lifetime of bitterness, that Griswold took offense to all the way to his death. Then Poe dies. He's the opportunity seasons that never let a good crisis go to waste. So he his works, and he publishes a kind of a memoir, not a memoir, but like a collection of all of Poe's works. And he includes,
and of course, includes all his commentary in there.
His commentary. He includes letters that supposedly reinforce Griswold's idea of him, but which later we come to know that they were forgeries. So he forged these letters. And so the reason I want you to know this is because I want you to remember this when they're talking about some other guy in history. It doesn't, not a writer, but just anyone famous, that think of how they're being talked about and written about. If they're being highlighted. Uh-oh.
Oh. Well, there we're back. We're back.
Sorry about that.
Thanks for hanging. We're about to
All right,
wrap up.
we're about to wrap up. 'Cause
Blue
this-
checks.
Yeah, we were going to explain more why we are calling Twain and Shakespeare blue checks. If you think about someone like Poe, who even back then people didn't like that he was challenging the status quo, or and even though he could get his stuff published, even this book Eureka, it was because of a friend of his allowed him to do it. And he wanted like how many copies, like 50,000, or
They settled on 750.
settled on 750. So in a way, I kind of think they were limiting,
Just like they do when they throttle people and they.
right. So what they do, when they're censoring, the right, or censoring people who are saying things that they don't want them to be saying, it's nothing new. It's just that it's easier for them to do that now. And so, Mark Twain and William Shakespeare, for whatever reason, were probably serving a purpose and not going against the, any accepted truths at the time. And so I would have to think that when the system writes positively about any of these characters, and
dissent is not accepted, because when you read about Poe in Eureka, they if you challenge stuff, if you were to put out a book that was just tearing down Mark Twain, you'd probably get some attacks at you. If you put up a book tearing up Shakespeare, you would probably get a system-wide, what do you think you're doing? You don't know what you're talking about.
Right. And when I researched Twain, I think I might have mentioned this in the last scope about Poe, that there's mention of this steamboat captain that had written a lot of things.
Oh yeah.
And I always wondered, did Twain steal that dude's? I got the feeling that he did. But when the system puts before and carries forth, generation after generation, who they want you to think positively of, you need to question that, because just like we're watching them rewrite history live before our eyes, there's nothing new under the sun. They've always done it. Start with Poe.
Started in a garden way back when.
Yeah, definitely.
And stuff being inverted.
And so we have one of the things in Eureka that Poe harps on is that we've so much of those lies accepted as truth have been pushed over, the centuries, that it's our intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you said our intuition, it's something else that we can rely on, that we have this ability for inner knowing.
We don't do it anymore. It's like the learning by rote. We're just memorizing things now. We're not thinking.
It's just like when you hear or meet somebody and you just know that they're real, that they're genuine. You have this inner knowing that you can discern truth from lies. And I can see why they wouldn't want that to catch on. We have this inner knowing. Oh, hey, Leonard.
Oh, hey, yeah, I just saw your comment.
We have this inner knowing because we were created, by this higher being, our creator.
And we're part of it, so we can discern this as well. And I was going to show you guys real quick. I was going to show a really scary picture, but I'm going to hold off on that one.
Yeah, we'll wait.
Here is Edgar Allan Poe. And of course, he died when he was 40, so that's probably close to when he died. Here we have Mark Twain, probably around the same age. He lived a lot longer than Poe did. I think he got into his 60s or so.
Yeah.
He was friends with Helen Keller and other folks.
Who was that other one?
I can't remember what that was. So then we go to, a lot of people might recognize, this is William Shakespeare. And then here is Christopher Harlow.
Christopher Marlowe or
Marlowe. Yeah, because one of the theories about his death is the Marlovian theory.
Yeah, a lot of people think that Marlowe was really Shakespeare. But there's no way for us to really know. But there's ways to read how the system.
And pray for that, and then start trusting in it too, and just we sometimes we even read Wikipedia.
Yeah,
And
because
so
you can kind of read
see,
between the lines.
and even sometimes the stuff that they're going to brag about, they
Yeah.
reveal truth, and even though it's bad stuff, they kind of reveal truth that way too. So it's just kind of,
And you can read it and you're like, oh, okay.
you can laugh.
You'll
about
know what's true and what's not true. And so one other thing, I did read. I don't even think we mentioned Nielsen Poe. Nielsen Poe was
Brian's cousin.
Edgar Allan Poe's cousin, but Poe considered him to be the bitterest enemy in this world, which not much known for why. His first wife, Virginia Clem, when she was 13, Nielsen Poe was gonna let her come. He invited her to come live with him and his wife, and it would take him far away from Poe. And Poe thought it was going to interfere with, Poe intended to marry her. But to make a long story short on that, I read the obituary on Nielsen Poe, and he was a judge at the time. And it claims in this obituary that Judge Poe was present at the death of his cousin, the poet. He was the first to find Edgar Allan Poe at the close of a municipal election in a state of stupefaction, which resulted in the poet's death in a back room of the Fourth Ward polls. Now, this is, an official, obituary that was written in the newspaper.
Yeah.
It was a lie. So,
because the dates don't match up, and then so this bitter enemy, this cousin, he's the one that finds him.
Right, and he's at the hospital. So, I mentioned earlier in this stream about the two shadowy gentlemen that were following Poe on the train. If someone Poe writes the Eureka like a year and 3 months.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think it was a year and a half. It was almost a year and a half before his death, and was going to continue going on a lecture series talking about it, promoting it. He was going to create a magazine, and that kind of reach would definitely have more impact. So, I could see somebody taking Poe out, and was Nielsen Poe his bitterest enemy in this world? Part of that plot, was he at the hospital with Poe, and did he finish the job that they didn't?
Yeah. Or just made sure he didn't get the help he needed.
Right. And so I just mentioned that again, as you research these things in history, there's not what you can't go to any one place where it's going to tell the story, but you can kind of put the pieces together, and then with your intuition, your inner knowing.
And we've got work to do still. There's so much, and it's a lot of questions.
Right.
And so you question the narratives that come out of 1848, 49 when he died, and then you start going, okay, what else?
Right. Why?
Been told is not true.
So the fact that when Lou and I first discovered that he was not this only drunk, just stumbling and gambling his way through life, obsessed with death, the other characters in history, like everything is a lie, but God is not. And what he wrote about in Eureka, apparently they don't want you to know about. So I would suggest you get the book and read.
Several times to really get it sink in. He's, like I said, even just a single sentence is complex, and words in there that I don't.
But it is interesting.
Yeah, it is. You can even, like I was wrote down earlier, me and Yvonne can't fully grasp the whole thing.
Right.
And there's more to discover, to read.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
We will be back next
We will
month,
shoot for November.
13th, hopefully. I don't know what day that falls
That's a
on.
possibility. Slight.
Maybe
Might be
talking
the
to Mark
week
Twain and
after.
William Shakespeare. I don't know, but it's fascinating to kind of decipher and debunk these characters in history that we
And
know they've
probably
been lied about.
look at the Christopher Marlowe some
Marlowe.
more, because that one's interesting too. I think he was pushing up against the world's narrative back then too. So
Right.
we'll sign out before we get cut off again,
Right.
and appreciate everybody
Thanks
that
for
was
listening.
here.